our special board meeting for USD 453. The date is at January 27th. The time is 5 p.m. So we will start with roll call. Ms. Murphy.
Here.
Ms. Wells.
Here.
Ms. Price.
Here.
Mr. Hurd.
Here.
Ms. Wilson.
Here.
And Ms. Brown.
Here.
And I'm here, so we're all here. Okay, we'll move to adoption of the agenda.
I make a motion to adopt the agenda as presented.
Second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Okay. All right, so we're ready for item 2 and the announcements.
She's right.
Okay, so we go back to the October board meeting. If I recall, we had mentioned the idea of bringing this back. This is now the second, maybe even the third time that we have engaged with RSP Associates. So here tonight to present the latest. I want to make sure I pronounce your name correctly.
Yes, Jenna Wallace.
Jenna, okay. Very good.
Yes. All right, good evening, everybody. My name is Jenna Wallace, planner with RSP Associates. I'm going to walk you guys through the 25-26 enrollment analysis. So a little bit about RSP. We are a planning consulting firm based out of Kansas City. So we're just down in Overland Park. We work solely with school districts all over the Midwest, assisting in that data foundation for you all to really fill your toolbox to make some different planning decisions by. We worked with you guys back in 2018-19 was our latest when it was an enrollment and a boundary study. And so with that analysis, we were able to do some different facility planning back in 2018-2019. And so the report tonight, it's pretty lengthy. So I think, we're probably at 60, 70 pages. I don't plan to speak to all those pages. I'm going to keep this more high-level information. The report doubles as your full enrollment analysis, but also my presentation tonight. So I'm going to speak more around 20 or so minutes, hit those high-level points, and if there's any questions or discussion we want to dig in more, we can definitely do that. And so the report's broken out into 4 main parts: what's been happening with enrollment and demographics, housing, and then how do those variables feed into that projection model and then next steps? How do you guys use this as the tool that it is? And so your executive summary here of the report, we do have the district continuing to decrease over these next 5 years. The decreases more so exist at the elementary level and then our high school level. So middle school grades stabilize slightly as we start to see more similar grade levels in those grade bands. High school decreases a bit more as we graduate our larger classes and have smaller grades coming in. We'll talk about facility utilization and some of our capacity challenges when we look at underutilization of those facilities, and then go through some of these key variables like demographics, like birth rates, and housing. And so part 1 of the report, you have lots of maps in the board. This first visual is just the district boundary and city limits, so getting a sense of our regional full district boundary. And then leading to our current elementary boundary. So our district is divided into 3 different elementary schools that correlates with those projections by building. The next visual here goes into the RSP model. So something that really boosts our statistical accuracy and really gives us ways to be very granular with our results is the RSP planning areas. So every district, what we do is we break it down into really block pieces that are all analyzed in the model. So you can think of this as one neighborhood, one subdivision in the community. We know how many kids live there, what's the age of the inventory, what's the price of the inventory, are they building new units, are they decreasing? All of those different variables that go up and down is analyzed in the model. And that gives us the ability to be very granular with the results and understand in each neighborhood, are they leaning towards more limitations of growth or indicators of growth? And so if you're a statistics person, this might mean something to you. If you're not, just know that it is statistics. So we're feeding it the best known variables and pushing out that most likely forecast. Most of the variables will also fall into one of these 2 categories. limitations of growth or indicators of growth. And so as the model reads all those out, we're pushing up that most likely forecast, utilizing the 20 plus years of RSP history, but then also just our known regional statewide factors. And so one of our key variables that we look at in the model is your live birth rate. And so what we have here is the county birth rate over these past 10 years and the relationship of live births and 5 years later kindergarten students in the district. And what we show here is the market share percent. So of the demographic live births, and this would be mothers that have their addresses in Leavenworth County. It's not where they give birth, it's if their addresses are within the county. And so what we can see from that is we have been trending downwards, but we're seeing less live births per year. This is very consistent. We're seeing this statewide and in most of the school districts that we work with of a demographic shift, of having less babies born, and what that does is limit the ability to see increases in that kindergarten market. And so we did see a dip in that kindergarten class, and you can see that's correlating with this trajectory of less births per year, having that lower market share of about 17%, while historically you were seeing greater than 20% of that live birth. And so those two factors coming in as limitations to that kindergarten enrollment. We also look at here your past enrollment by grade. So a lot of data on that slide, but this gives you the historical view of how your different grade levels are working their way through the system and what the overall trend has been. So we've seen district loss the past 4 years, and so dipping down this year by 173 students. So we've had a bit more of that district-wide loss the past 2 years, and really the caveat to that is we've been graduating larger classes than the new classes coming in. So as we graduate larger and have smaller incoming classes, we have this system-wide progression downwards. Some ways to offset that limitation is to pick up students in your grade progression. And so as classes move through the system, do they tend to go up or down? That's going to be factored into the model as well. We tend to see pretty minimal cohort gains, and so those classes stay pretty stable, or they decrease a little bit as they work their way through the system. Until you'll see in this chart that 8th to 9th grade cohort. That's one of your best cohorts to pick up students. You tend to see students in migrating, open enrollment, as well as probably like private school or homeschool students coming into the district for that high school programming. So it creates a good boost in those upper grade levels, but it also is kind of a sticky wicket. What it creates is larger high school classes than those elementary classes, so continues that offset a little bit. And so we compare really those two theories in this next visual of kindergarten versus 12th grade in that first visual. And what you'll see is the years that you decreased at the greatest levels, you had the greatest difference between those two values. As we forecast forward, what we're seeing with the model is that 12th grade continues to decrease as smaller grades come up, and kindergarten stabilizes a little bit. And so because those two grades, if you look out on 2030, 31, those two, the red bar and the blue bar, become closer in size, it creates more stability in the district. Not necessarily an indication of growth, but what it does is create more stability, and that decrease would be more stable year to year instead of more of that higher 4 to 5% differences that you have been seeing the last 2 years. Another variable in the model looks at migration trend, and so we're looking at really that first grade to 11th grade of new students in versus I was a past student and now I've transferred out of state, private, something like that. And so the orange bars here are new students for the past 3 years. Green is past students that have left the district. And what is that net growth in between of those? So we do tend to see more of that out migration than in migration the past 3 years. High school tends to see more in migration. So with that boost from 8th to 9th grade, creating a greater net gain for those 9th to 12th grade classes, but more of a limitation to those early grades. And this is also represented in your out-of-district open enrolled data. So when we're looking at that overall trend of about 315 to 350 out of district students, so open enrolled as well as maybe just some students that live out of the district boundary, what we've been seeing is a slight dip the past 2 years. Majority of those out of district students are high school grade levels, and then they reside in Fort Leavenworth school district. So that's your main contributor to that out of district enrollment. The next two visuals here go into the density of the district. And so this visual is a count change map. So we're focused in on those different building blocks of the community. And what we're seeing is if it's green, that neighborhood has been decreasing in students. Orange, it's been increasing. So you can kind of see this patchwork quilt where some neighborhoods have been generating more students while others have been decreasing. And this gets into the demographics of the community and what we call a subdivision life cycle. So at some point, when you build new units, you tend to see the most students you're ever going to see in those new houses. And then that slowly decreases as we age in place and we may not turn over in our inventory. But what always happens is at some point, it also turns back over and we start to see maybe new families moving in. It doesn't ever get back to its peak of when it was first built, but it does increase back. And so what we're seeing here is that subdivision life cycle where we're growing versus where we're having decreasing in our neighborhood. And they're all unique, and that's why we track them all independently. The next visual here is your student density map. And so in this case, looking at all of these students in the district, where do we have our hot pockets of student density? So you can see your greatest hot pocket down in the southeast in the multifamily inventory, having your densest part of the district, and then more so sporadic and more spread out a little bit on your north side. And so that goes through that part one. And so you can see a lot of these different variables are more so limiting that ability to see district-wide growth, and that model is reading it as more of that continued decrease rather than indication of growth. Before I go into part two, any questions, clarifications anybody needs?
Do you have specifically the same map on page 20 from the first study that you did with us?
I definitely could. I don't have it in this packet, but I would have it that we can send it over to you guys.
That'd be great, because I'd
Yeah.
like to know if within this last, 8 years, if we've had changes in movement.
Absolutely. All right, so then part two of the report, looking at population, housing. This first graphic here is a correlation graphic. And so what it shows is the year-to-year change from these key variables. What's been happening with population, and that's the green line. So it's been pretty steady growth of about 40 total people, all ages in the district, and so pretty steady total population. Our building activity is that blue line, and so pretty minimal building activity. We had a spike in 2019, 2020 with some of the new inventory that came online. But since then, around 10 units built per year, and that red line is your student enrollment change. And so there was the big swing of the pandemic, so we decreased and then we recovered, and then since then we've been more on that downward slope. So as we continue to see more so stable population and limited housing inventory, it's correlating with a decreasing trend in the district. The student yield rate analysis, this also feeds into the model, and it looks at the number of students that you typically generate per housing unit. And so what you have here is the past 10 years of that yield rate analysis. Orange bars being your single family inventory, green being your multifamily. So 10 years ago, the district was seeing 30 students per 100 single family homes. So kind of a 3 out of 10 homes of that ratio. And over time, we've seen that decrease. And so this year, 25-26, we're at 23 students per 100 single family homes. So as we start seeing that kind of aging inventory and that lack of turnover, that creates that downward trajectory. Multifamily has stayed more stable, so you can see some ups and downs, but relatively between 19 to 21 students per 100 multifamily inventory. And this is really helpful when we do think about new development and new projects coming online. There is a difference of the yield of apartments versus single family, and especially the affordability. And so getting into those different nuances helps us generate more specifically how many students you guys could see. We break down that yield rate even further on these next two tables, where you're looking at the same methodology, but it would be the yield rate in each of those elementary boundaries. So for your single family inventory, David Brewer has the largest single family yield rate. Anthony has the smallest, but it's still pretty relatively similar. So 20 to 25 students per 100 single family home. Multifamily, also pretty good spread there, where we're between 19 to 21. So the boundaries as they're placed right now have a very similar demographic yield between them. Sometimes we see very drastic swings in elementary boundaries, but you guys have a pretty good balance there. Your total district inventory is on these next two graphics, so you can see inventory built in each decade and where we're at in our total housing inventory in that top graphic. And so we built the most units really before the 1940s in the 80s here. So that was your greatest decade of inventory built. You can see it's decreased since then each decade. And then on that bottom graphic, you can see the makeup between your single family and multifamily inventory. Kind of like I was just saying, it's a pretty good balance where between your housing inventory, you have a good number of units in both of those boundaries. Henry Leavenworth having the fewest multifamily units, but the most single family units. The next two, or I think 3 to 4 visuals here, go into that housing market. And so this visual is your average year built. And so looking at those different neighborhoods, older inventory in blue, newer inventory in red and orange. You can kind of see this almost C shape of the older inventory being in the northeast, and as how we have built, kind of extending towards that southwest of newer units in the district. And that correlates here with median home value. So similar kind of pattern here of more affordable units being in that northeast. Newer inventory tend to be more expensive towards that southwest. And then we pull into, this map is a dot map of the past 5 years of residential activity. And so as of 2025, when we finished up our report, we had 15 units built. And so you can see that's greater than what we have seen in the past couple of years, but still pretty minimal when we look at overall district inventory. But there is some potential for growth in the community, and so we meet with the city as well as the county and get a sense of what projects might be on the pipeline, what should we plan for in the near term as well as the long term. And so this visual gives you a sense of that kind of outlook of development activity. Green being the most active, so we have one development in the green that we're still kind of waiting to get the tires really going on that, waiting on some different historic preservation funding, but they are working through planning commission to redevelop some different units. And so likely that happening within the next 2 to 3 years. The yellow and purple is more on that long-term timeline. So we would want to watch those different areas have potential for growth, but we'd have to see kind of the different items get approved with the planning commission to get those going. And so the outlook of that map, what we have here, is about 1,000 units over the next 10 plus years that are on the potential horizon. Those always change. Developers can come in and change their mind, but this kind of gives you a snapshot as far as what the city is looking at currently. Like I said, that one Helmer's building redevelopment has the most potential to add some new multifamily development over the next couple of years. The purple and the yellow, you would definitely hear from the city and get some more action there before you would start to see those units built. And then what we have here for your regional project spotlight, and so in this case we have the Starbond project, and that's part of that development analysis that was in the yellow, and so that being a very awesome project that the city's working on. We know that's still really in process to get that voted on. So that's going to be approved. If that does get approved, we have some different potential for regional attraction, job growth, as well as residential. Another thing I should mention that's not on the slide is with the Chief Stadium. I know that's really promoting more so just like Wyandotte and Leavenworth County. And so exactly how that all shakes out with the jobs and the Olathe facility, we're really focusing on that in all of our school districts that we work with in this corridor. And so that goes through part 2 here of the report. Any questions on any of those slides?
So based upon your statistics on how many kids you get out of multifamily, single family, we're looking at possibly gaining 200 students out of 1,000 units, new homes,
Yes.
plus minus.
Mm-hmm. And that would be all of those units built, and that is that's that long-term trajectory with about of that 115 units are in those active stages. Yeah. And so part 3 here of your enrollment forecast. And so you have the past, really like 10 years of data here, and then the next forecast in 5 years. So what the projection model pushed out for the district is a decrease of about 9% over these next 5 years. And so that's spread out where it's about a 1 to 2% decrease over these next 5 years. And the year 4 to year 5 becomes more stable. Your more increases or greater decreases, happen in those first years of the projection and then stabilize a bit further. For your elementary and intermediate enrollment, we have this decreasing to about 1,300 total students. And so that's about a 12% decrease at that elementary level. Middle school fluctuates, and this really depends on which grade levels are moving into those middle school grades. And so some years it dips, some years it comes back up. By 2030-31, we have the middle school increasing slightly to 420 students. And so that's that stability in those middle grades. High school, we have this factoring to decrease over these next 5 years as we graduate our largest classes and have smaller. Even with that 8th to 9th grade boost that we do see, we're not seeing it come up to the same level of the classes that 4 years ago were in 9th grade. And so that creates that high school transition down. And so this gives you your overall view of enrollment, more of that gradual decline. What we go into next on this page is really kind of your best view of the overall of the report. You have each of your buildings and their enrollment projected, that capacity that was provided by the district, and then looking forward those next 5 years. And so we have each of these buildings where you see green is where that enrollment is less than 70% of the capacity. 70% is a good target that RSP uses when we're having these different utilization conversations, as when you start to dip below that 70% of capacity, you start having some inefficiency, some challenging with staffing, and some other conversations that you might want to have. So it's just a good indicator to think about. Orange is where you're over capacity. So currently that intermediate school is above their capacity. You can see it's forecasted to continue the next 3 years and then resolve itself as we start seeing those smaller grades move into the intermediate school. And then the last part of our projection report here is your enrollment by grade. And so you have the next 5 years of enrollment looking at each of those cohorts. And so we're looking at kindergarten continuing to be below that 200 students, and that is that structural limitation. We think it's going to come back to higher than what it was this year, so kind of more so in that 180 to 190 target. But as you graduate classes that are 200, 250 plus students, that gap between the students correlates with that year-to-year losses. You can also see on this map or on this table that year-to-year change, so that losses of about 1% to even less to more of that 0.7%. That gives you that more stability that we're seeing in years 4 to 5 after your largest grades in the district graduate. And so that goes through really the majority of my report here. This part 3 conclusions kind of gives you a sense of how our different levels are making their way through the system. So the intermediate school, they're over, they start to decrease. Those grades, they move into middle school, we start to see middle school growth. Elementary, with the demographic changes, is limiting their growth. In high school, graduating their largest classes limits their growth. And so with that, we have just some next steps, and I know this really feeds into the next presentation with you all. We would always recommend having kind of that annual analysis of enrollment, especially when you're considering different facility and utilization. That kindergarten class coming in at that 174 is pretty low, and we would definitely want to take a good look at your roundup of kindergarten next year to see if that's coming back up with that demographics influx. And then utilization of your buildings probably being the next conversation point of having an efficient use of your staff as well as that classroom experience for the students. So with that, what questions do you guys all have for me?
Did you get any data from Fort Leavenworth USD 207 because they're at risk based upon what the students bring in with them every year? And lately it's been less students. A lot of majors are leaving their families at home and not moving them for that year.
We have, as far as their just state enrollments, and we do pull kind of the periphery school districts that you touch, but as far as that, the student data by their addresses, that sort of data we only have for you guys. But what we do is look at those overall trends, that open enrollment slide that we can see how those different relationships have been for your model.
Well, USD 207 is changing some of their demographics depending on the vote. They may be making it mandatory. The only way a child will attend their schools at all is if they're living on floor. And housing's goal is that they get more renters there. So that means anyone and everyone, whether they're actually active duty military or not, would in hopes rent the home so they don't have vacant homes. Whether that ends up hurting us or helping us, I don't know.
That would be a really good variable that, like next year if that happens, to kind of come back and check and see, because I'm not sure either how that exactly, if that would hurt or benefit you guys. We'd have to dig into really Fort Leavenworth student data.
And I was curious, you mentioned you work with the city. In what capacity do you?
Yeah, so we met with the city planning department, and so getting a sense of just a virtual meeting, as well as we then drive the district to get a sense of, the household growth, but then getting a sense from the planners, what's going through planning commission, what do you see on the pipeline, is our unit counts right, that sort of thing. That gives us that development and growth table. We source it from their information. Absolutely.
You gonna be able to stick around?
Yes.
Okay.
Do you want me to stay here?
Wherever you're going.
I'll go back.
This is a bad spot. All right, we will transition now. I want to say thank you to RSP for being here tonight. She's going to hang out in the event there are questions, but this does represent that effective transition to what are now more of our internal plans. So with that, I want to first recognize the weight of the decisions that are in front of you. Mr. Darling, Mrs. Brown, welcome to the fray. I don't think anybody is envious of the 7 of you right now. These are really tough decisions that are in front of us. would argue that their decisions have to be made for not just the short-term implications, but for the long-term vitality of the district. Tonight is intended to be a deeper dive into the options that have been discussed. As you well know, we are slated for a February 9th decision point. I will say this probably ad nauseum. I don't think it is what's best for this system to delay decisions into April and May. I think we need to decide what we're going to do, good, bad, or otherwise, and let people deal with those implications. Continuing to string this out, I think, only has negative cultural impacts and otherwise. I would be remiss if I didn't start here. I know we have this on the wall, and sometimes it serves as a platitude, but I'm going to say that we need to consistently come back to this as we make the tough decisions that are in front of us. This absolutely has an impact on finance and operations, but I would argue it transcends horizontally to all 5 of those pillars. Whatever you do here will touch teaching and learning. It will have an impact on staff. Without hesitation, it will cascade into the community and definitely impact kids. So from a high-level overview, we're looking really now at this point at much more structural pieces. I would contend that what we did last year, which was to the tune of about $4 million, and that might seem like a big number, but was arguably lower impact than what we're talking about today. We never entertained a pink slip conversation ever last year. We were still able to give compensation increases across the board. You get the idea. These are much more structural and much more permanent. We do have 4 options we're going to discuss, and I want to recognize that our elementary closures have both the highest savings, but also the highest impact. So as the saying goes, the greater the risk, the greater the reward. The intermediate reconfiguration, I think, does have some multiple options within it. And I also recognize its savings a little more moderate. But regardless of what we talked about tonight, I cannot think of an option we're discussing that does not have some level of disruption. So where are we at today? From a broad perspective, we're dealing with a $3.3 million deficit that is grounded in 2 numbers, the first of which is a loss of revenue. That loss of revenue is associated with less students that will be in the district next year. Just as a reminder, in Kansas school finance, more kids equal more money, less kids equal less money. The other, the $2.1 million number, is very much an estimate at this point. We're still waiting on some of those final numbers to come in. Key example there would be health insurance. We're still waiting on what that final rate is. But one thing I want to stress on line number 2 is that does include a plan to provide some level of a compensation increase across the board. I can't tell you what that dollar amount is per person or what that percentage is, but suffice it to say, we are planning for a compensation increase for our 500 plus minimum. The revenue is pretty simple. It is tied directly to the Kansas school finance formula. So this is not an issue of, hey, should we raise taxes or not? That is entirely born out of the additional base aid. And then finally, you'll see savings to date, which we're dating January 12th for purposes of that's the last board meeting. We have effectively frosted, if you will, another 14 positions. That comes after the 40-some plus that we frosted last year. The total gap tonight, $1.5 million in change. This is probably a slide we will come back to a time or two. It is what was used directly with the RSP report, and it speaks to that, what is known as functional capacity. That is the idea of effectively using every classroom that is a classroom space for classroom instruction. So again, I use this example frequently, but those of you that have been in the district for a while, you'll remember when we were a K-6 elementary setup, and generally speaking, 4 sections. It has been asked several times, hey, how can we possibly make this work? Anthony already uses every single classroom. We're going to show you tonight that it is nearly 10 classrooms that are currently not used for what is known as functional capacity. So, any questions so far? All right. So, what are we going to discuss tonight? If nothing else, I'd like to get into a deeper dive of 1A and 1B, as followed by 2A and 2B. I would expect that we will kind of vacillate back and forth, possibly with 4, but also as time allows 5 through 8, because I think they have some direct connections to the conversations both tonight as well as the decisions on the 9th. So let's dive in first to option 1. Option 1, if you will, has 2 parts to it. A is the closure of Anthony. B is the closure of Brewer. When we decided on the scope of work, our team broke this up into really 4, arguably 5 parts. That was to find what we believed were the key pros, the key cons, or those financial implications, both from a savings as well as a potentially increased cost expense. And then finally, what are those political and or community implications? Knowing again that whatever you decide cascades throughout this entire Leavenworth community. We believe a pro associated with our elementary buildings is it would improve your consistency across the elementary buildings. You're now looking at 2 campuses instead of 3. So that variability is arguably reduced. This does align with long-term enrollment trends, as you just saw. The majority of the development, so to speak, that is on the table is not necessarily in that enrollment directly tied to Anthony currently. We do recognize there is some currently in the Anthony contingent. This does offer some efficiency for special ed service delivery. We recognize there are certainly implications regardless of which building you close, but you would have some potential efficiencies offered there. An example, Dr. Merle, I think we beautifully harkened back to was at the psych services. That's probably the best example I can give here, where those FTEs are not spread about 3 buildings, but rather 2. Certainly reduces the duplication of staffing meetings, etc., right? Now you've got less of those FTEs. And the beauty of an elementary closure is the way in which those licenses work. You're either a K-6 or, for some of our more seasoned veterans, K-9 licenses. And so the variability, if you will, is much less reduced than if it was, say, a high school math teacher that has a pretty narrow channel through which they can be licensed and appropriately assigned. So what are some of those cons? I recognize that this is a highly accessible and it is a one level building for our younger students. Anthony's, is all on one level. That I think is a critical piece. I think the geography certainly plays a role, and it is in a vital part of the community. There would be reduced flexibility for small group and collaborative spaces. If you attended some of those meetings last week, we were in some of those collaborative spaces that unfortunately would have to be repurposed. We were just in the design zone today at Henry. As you can imagine, a wall going up about halfway. That design zone is no longer a design zone, it's now 2 classrooms. Instructional resource alignment would be absolutely required, again, with the idea that you're going from 3 campuses to 2. And I have no doubt that this type of reassignment will impact staff morale. In fact, one could argue it already has, and you haven't even actually made the decision yet. So what is the financial impact first for Anthony? The reduction here is an approximate 19 positions. What I want to emphasize here with the math is that these are using current classified averages and current certified averages. So we don't go and count each and every one of those people in exactly that dollar. We use a salary package average. And I think methodologically that makes the most sense. That way, as we transfer it otherwise, we are able to maintain some consistency. So on an annum basis, per annum basis, this would be $1.5 million in operational dollars. We would recognize there would be some one-time costs. First, there is a cost to move. There is a cost to relocate. Think about all the phones, all the computers, all the desks. You get the idea. Whoever goes into that new space, as well as those leaving the current space, there is a cost to that. I've got the transportation impacts, which I'm going to come to here in a little bit. That's probably a deeper dive later in our source documents.
That wouldn't be a one-time occurring though, would it?
What's that?
The transportation wouldn't be
Nope.
a one-time.
I'm going to say that one is not one time. Yep. So that's why I want to dive into that a little bit later. And then if you decide on a more permanent space or a more permanent use for that space, you would have site modifications as needed. To be clear, we have not started entertaining formal bids with contractors or otherwise, but let's just pretend for a second that we started collapsing our building footprint and this building was no longer. And we said the board office will be located somewhere else. We would have to decide where the new boardroom would be, and there would likely be some renovations to whatever that space is. Does that make sense? So what are those political and community considerations? It is our opinion that there is a strong neighborhood identity and some very strong partnerships that are tied to it. I think you've got a high level of sensitivity, rightfully so, for services for a very vulnerable student population. It has come up and been expressed by a number of our parents, staff, and otherwise. There would absolutely need to be some culture that is rebuilt. You're talking about a current staff inheriting a new staff, a current student population inheriting a new student population, right? There is absolutely cultural implications to that. And without hesitation, there's both risk of staff, and I would argue even possibly student attrition during those transition periods. If people are left in flux, they begin to wonder, and they start to maybe look for new positions, new districts, etc. All right, I'm going to pause there. What questions might there be on 1A?
I have a question. And this would really be with all of them, because when you structurally change, as you were talking about the cost of renovation, the cost of moving, could our savings be potentially eaten up in the first year with the moving and the renovating and the,
Sure.
you know, because we're in a situation where we have to find savings, but any of these things, and I'm not saying that it wouldn't be worth doing, because, you know, ultimately you've got to get right size and you've got to get, you know, but I'm just a little bit concerned that, you know, the cost savings that we're looking for could potentially be eaten up with the cost of moving and the cost of renovating.
Excellent question. So for tonight, the lens we are looking through most of our conversation are those ongoing annual operational costs, i.e. cost of staff, cost of utilities, cost of insurance, etc. Right? For what you're referencing, Representative Overby, I would argue a lot of those are one-time cost, capital costs. So let's use again the idea that this office is closed, we need a new boardroom, and we have to spend $50,000 to renovate a space and make it boardroom appropriate. That would be a one-time capital cost versus an ongoing cost of $50K every year for that. Does that make sense?
So then, would that come out of capital outlay, or
That would be our proposal. Yep.
so you could potentially shift some of what we'd already planned for into something else?
So again, let's use this space as an example. We're planning on at some point, I'll just tell you, the roof needs replaced on this place sooner than later. If you don't have to replace this roof, that planned expense can be used for fill in the blank to renovate and make a new boardroom. Great question.
I know, I have a question on the Anthony one with the nutrition. I know in the summertime we do the program with feeding the families. Have we looked into that as, like, if we lose that school and we lose the walking distance for the families there, would that be in cost of the transportation that we're gonna provide, or what does that look like?
Yep, good question. As long as the building is still ours, we can host that summer food site at that site. So it's no longer an elementary building, but it's the board office now, or it's the alternative center or whatever. As long as it's still ours, we can still have that summer food site there.
You would just have extra staff go over there, and that's fine.
And I would recommend that we continue doing that. I'm glad you brought this up. At this time, we are not recommending selling Anthony or, here in a little bit, Brewer. I would recommend, if either of these options move forward, that we find a way to repurpose those sites. buildings I would recommend selling is the one you're in right now, the food service, and potentially some of those other central office type of locations.
And then I had one more, Chris, sorry. I've had several parents reach out that, for Anthony, they either walk their kids to school, like the parents walk them every day, or like if the kids are sick or something, there's a lot of families that walk to the school to pick up that sick kid and walk home. As far as transportation wise, what would we be doing on that?
And you're going to see here in a little bit that a number of Anthony families or students would now qualify for transportation. So that current limitation of 2.5 miles would become available for a number of kids that don't currently qualify.
But that raises our transportation cost again, which I know was high this year. And we were looking at more transportation already, but it was a financial thing, right?
Well, if more kids qualify, though, that would come from state aid, right?
Correct. So coming with that is state aid.
But to your point, the walking to pick up children or something, that doesn't fall under qualifying for state aid transportation. Right. And I wonder if we were to do that, I don't know how you get around that.
And conferences and needing to be able to come up with behavioral issues potentially.
I don't have a number for you tonight, but if the board said we want to make it a priority, we want to extend this service for conferences, Title I night, whatever that is, we would absolutely entertain that. I just cannot tell you what that cost would be tonight. But suffice it to say, I think there is a need there. Great questions. What else? Okay, let's look at Brewer. Optional 1B now. I'm going to try not to be repetitive, but as you can imagine, some of these things from 1A and 1B arguably carry with them the same pro or con. So we've got some of those same system-wide efficiencies we feel that are gained when you go from 3 campuses to 2. That variability is reduced. And again, this aligns with long-term enrollment realities. I think we all saw on the map where new housing can be built and where new housing cannot be built, right? Again, same concept, that elementary license flexibility is huge in this regard. This does, again, reduce some of our staffing and administrative duplication. The caveat with Brewer is the 2-level structure, and some of those classrooms have a larger footprint. So again, that is, to me, a separator from Anthony in that regard. Some of the cons, we have recognized that this is a very highly engaged PTO and parent community. So there would be disruption in that regard. You would have a significant impact to some of our specialized programs. And I've given the example here of Autism Classroom. As you begin to use more classrooms, you will put a proverbial squeeze on the available space for those specialized classrooms. And that was a conversation we heard at the staff meeting today relative to life skills. There's a certain amount of classroom footprint that those programs need to effectively operate. We do believe there would be some additional safety and infrastructure costs required here. I think we've talked ad nauseum at this table about playground enclosures, playground fencing. We still are of the opinion that needs to be entertained more seriously. And then again, this is a building with a higher level of special education prevalence. Dr. Barbo, please confirm we had our near 25% at this site. Is that correct?
Yes.
So 1 in 4 David Brewer students are identified in some type of an exceptionality.
Build on that for the other elementary schools, what's the approximate percentage for the other buildings?
Yep, so Henry Leavenworth is sitting between 20-21%, and then Anthony is hovering right around 18%. Yes.
And is that specifically because of the autism classroom at David Brewer, or is that demographically, that's just where the households reside within the boundaries?
Great question. So we take the students that are in our autism classrooms, our life skills classroom, Third Avenue, and we place them back at their home building. So those are truly, that's just where the population lies, and that's where the percentage is at.
Okay.
Great questions. All right, so our financial impact is nearly the same. And again, I think the FTE difference is about 1 here between Anthony. So this is arguably the same cost savings of 1.5. Karen, you want to go back?
Yeah. Okay, so the autism classroom at David Brewer, and you say that the special ed they're at their home schools.
The numbers are parsed back. So if I have a student that is their home building is David Brewer, then that number gets included in that percentage. But let's say I have a student that is originally from Henry that needs a placement in the autism classroom at David Brewer, that number goes back to Henry's identification rate because that student is a Henry
Okay.
student.
Okay, but they may actually be attending class at,
Yes.
okay.
So that
Because I was
percentage,
gonna say, that would not be very efficient if you had at all 3 elementary schools, you've got autism classroom and you've got.
correct, and that's why we do that.
Okay.
Yep. So that 25% does not include all students in the autism room, just the students at David Brewer that are David Brewer
Okay.
students.
Okay, all right, thank you. All right, go ahead.
Another question on special education. Are you seeing that our percentages building wise are fluctuating year to year, or are they increasing, or
They're
are they trending?
increasing.
About what rate would you say that they're increasing?
So I would say, I have to pull the hard numbers and I
Mm-hmm.
can definitely share that with you. Anecdotally, based on what we're seeing, I would say we're seeing about a 1% increase at this point every year. We're growing.
At each building?
Yep. Some of the buildings have a little bit of like dipping here and there. I would say David Brewer is exponentially growing at a rate higher than some of our other buildings. The high school is also on an increase as well.
Do we think that is possible because there's more accessible playgrounds in that area, that families might be moving to that area specifically for those things?
I couldn't answer that. I don't know. That could be, but I don't have any evidence to say that is for sure the case.
Good question. To Ms. Wells' point, what we have seen is total net student enrollment dropping, but the number of students on IEPs either staying the same or arguably increasing.
So the cost of our students are increasing while the number of students are decreasing.
Our historical data would show that over the past 7 years, the trend has been, on average, if you average the total number of students lost, right, over the past 7 years, for every year that we lose about 84 students, we lose only 1 student with special needs. So our numbers are not decreasing in special ed.
And what percentage do you state reimburse on special ed? Not enough, I know that.
Yeah, we're in the 60% this year, 60, 65%.
So going with that, Kellen, just an idea, so I know that we have a pull from our gen ed to cover our spend. What is our pull last year, or the last average?
I'd have to.
3.3 if I recall. Yep.
Okay.
So
3.3 mil.
Yeah, 3.3 million.
It's coming from our
Gen ed
general to go
cover
to special ed.
That is accurate.
So less students, less money, but higher costs because more of those students
Yep.
are special.
This is not an indictment on students with IEPs.
I was gonna.
No.
That was my.
Right.
That was my next thought because I mean we work hard to get those kids the help that they need. So
Yep.
I was hoping that's what I wasn't hearing.
No,
Thank you.
And I do want to say the kids at David Brewer, from my time volunteering up there, when a kid has a meltdown, they know just don't engage, just keep on
Sure.
trucking, doing what they're supposed to be doing.
Ms. Wells, I like your question though, because I've often wondered, is there certain things that are causing folks to migrate in, right? In a positive way. So I appreciate you asking. I don't think we have anything to support that either in theory.
I could check.
All right, so back to the savings. This represents nearly the same number of FTE. And again, I'm using those classified and certified averages. The cost here, savings-wise, is $1.5 million. Some of those same, if you will, increased or one-time costs. We think there is a notable difference with this site. Should you decide to modify or add, Anthony has significant challenges due to the elevation issues at that site. So it would likely come at a lesser cost with with the much flatter site plan that David Brewer has. Again, that is very preliminary. I want to offer that, okay? But as you begin to think about what do you do with the space, how do you repurpose it, elevation challenges should be, I guess, in my opinion, out on the table as a potential concern.
And David Brewer already has an elevator there.
There you go. All right, political and community considerations. Again, back to what we have identified as a strong family and PTO identity that has really been historically associated with that site. I think that would drive the proverbial wedge between those folks that have wanted to engage with this site for a number of years. We recognize fully this would have an absolute disruption on those specialized services. Again, 1 in 4 students and your sole location right now for the autism classroom. There's going to be that cultural rebuilding at each receiving school, we know that, as well as that potential large staff turnover. But the one that we've recognized here that is more David Brewer specific is due to the location in the northwest corner of town, it may be easier for families to migrate out of the district. They may be able to go to a Pleasant Ridge because it is arguably almost as close. And they may have the means for transportation to do so. Does that make sense? So that student/family mobility, I would argue, is a little higher here. I want to recognize there is absolutely some conjecture built into several of these slides, right? But we have reason to believe, based on what people have told us otherwise.
And I know kids that are in Pleasant Ridge that are in David Brewer attendance area.
Thank you. Oh, what's up? Questions that we haven't answered yet on 1B. Ms. Wells.
So something that was brought up that I would just like you to say out loud, why are we not considering closing Henry?
Excellent question. You look at the total site condition. There is a marked difference between the capital infrastructure, condition, age, accessibility, etc. at Henry when compared to the other two. The other two were 1955-ish build, right?
I think currently mid to late 50s.
Now, clearly, I've seen some renovations. I want to make that clear. The Henry, I believe, was a 2010 build.
15 years.
The second caveat to that is when you look at where is potential new homes to exist, and you go to that report you saw earlier, I don't believe it makes sense to potentially close down the building that would be nearest the new development.
And then also, why are we not considering that the families that attend Henry have the ability to go to the other facilities, whereas the families at Anthony have less of the ability to go to Henry or David Brewer? Families with transportation. There's less families with transportation issues, is my perception, that live in the Henry area than in the Anthony area.
So back to, should we just close Henry instead of the other two?
Correct.
So that facility age and location are our two primary drivers.
Okay.
Good question. Anyone else?
Just for transparency, when you said your team put this together for you, can you elaborate on who your team is?
Sure. Cabinet, HR, Amy Jo Troyer and Amy Sloan. Beth now running the business department, at least at the cabinet level. Demeron has, but he would have contributed in some form or fashion. Learning services, Dr. Bodensteiner, Dr. Soberone. Facilities, Mr. Marble. Special ed, Dr. Marble. Student supports, Dr. Reynoldsberger. Did I miss anybody? Oh, yes, thank you. Ryan, back there, running all of our technology needs, yes.
So
Thank you.
this is not a Kellen idea that's been put before us, it's your whole cabinet.
Yes. In fact, to what was the genesis of the idea? This started, I think, in the early part of November with a community survey. And it asked for what is your input and or ideas. What percolated had to then intersect with what actually has budget savings. So I want to make clear there were some really good ideas out there, and there's still really good ideas that continue to come up in conversations. But if those ideas do not represent a budget savings, we're at this time saying, hey, those are great, but we've got to solve our math problem first. And so if you're wondering why didn't certain things make the list and others did, we are focused first on the immediate, and then we can move to the more strategic. Thank you for the question. Thank you. What else?
I don't think a new boardroom needs to cost $50,000. Just give us some folding tables and chairs.
All right, noted.
Just use these.
All right, option 2, for this purpose, I'm going to not necessarily divide as much as I did with Brewer and Anthony. Arguably, there is, if you will, less, so to speak, to discuss in singularity. So for purposes of tonight, and otherwise, 2A looks at repatriating our 5th graders back to the elementary buildings. 2B looks at taking the 6th graders to the current Ward campus. I'm going to say, first and foremost, this is Kellen's opinion only, but I think one of our issues that may be able to be resolved here is we transition students too often in this district. If you are a K-12 student here, you have the opportunity to attend at least 5 campuses. Lawson, whatever elementary, the IC, Richard Warren, and the high school. And that's, of course, if your parents didn't move in your elementary years, right?
And a lot of them do move. What percentage of our city moves during the year?
Well, in our district, we have 600 net new in and out students every year. So we have a 3A district that migrates in and out every year. My point is this an opportunity to address maybe some of the other challenges while also addressing the budget related matter. This does extend some of the students remain in their home elementaries, right? The idea here is if you're a 4th grader at Henry today, you become a 5th grader at Henry next year. I would argue that lessens the disruption because they're already at that site. I also believe this addresses some of those more long-standing concerns that have been expressed to me anecdotally. If nothing else, I would say this is arguably one of our top concerns that have come through my desk or my inbox. Concerns with the 5th and 6th grade model. And I want to say it again, and I'll probably say it 100 more times. This is not an indictment on the staff. It is a difficult time in a 12-year-old, 13-year-old's life, and you're bringing kids together that have effectively known each other in the 3 houses of their elementaries, and you're now bringing them together into the proverbial melting pot for the first time at that age. That, to me, represents a number of challenges. We believe this does improve some of our staffing alignment, and also goes back to maybe what you want to call the more traditional K through 5 and 6 through 8 structures. And without hesitation, it frees up space at one of our newest buildings, which of course then bleeds into the next conversation I'm hoping to get to, which is what do we strategically do moving forward now that we have space.
As I look at the numbers, if we bring 5th graders back to the elementary schools, the 2 that are left, we don't have room to bring 6th graders back as well.
5th grade would be going back to the
But 6th grade could go to the Warren.
Well, that's a question. Do we have the option? I don't think we have the option of moving 6th graders back into 2 elementary schools.
Oh, sure. Yes, I believe the numbers would not be in your favor.
And 5th graders would go back to 3 buildings, right?
Depending on what you do with option 1, yes. And I'm going to get to, like, can we combine options and all that here in a little bit. All right. So what are some of those cons? Well, first, let's recognize the elephant in the room. It was part of the latest bond issue.
Well, along with that, like, we're talking about, along with the bond, we did the intermediate center, but we also did all of those collaboration spaces at each of the buildings that we're now going to get rid of and put walls back up. And so we're wasting our money for a good idea that we thought was going to work that's not working.
Right,
So-
there used to be a sign right over there. It said, vote yes for kids, right on that bookcase,
Yeah.
right behind you, behind the board table. Vote yes for kids. It was hanging up there January 2018 for the election on June 15th, 2018. And I was new, so like these two, well, one former member and one new member on here now trying to face hard decisions, not really understanding necessarily everything that was being told. We were being told that our enrollment was declining at the time. That was being observed then, but yet we still had to separate the kids out and have all these new state-of-the-art buildings to turn around $40 million later, be told, oh yeah, bad idea. And there were questions, and I remember those questions at the board table and in the site councils of what is it going to do for the kids to be separated like that. One of the separations was supposedly for behavior. And then we separate them out and we have behavior. So it's a darned if you do, darned if you don't thing. And that is very frustrating because right underneath that it said no taxes. But here we are every year. We want more tax money. We want more tax money. And now we're going to take away. So regardless of what our decisions are and hard as they're going to be, I find it very difficult to try and explain to people that we have a $40 million bond that we are paying interest on, which comes out to far more than $4 million for them to say we're taking it all away and we're still going to be increasing your taxes. So they're paying for a bond for buildings that we're not going to have possibly anymore. There's still that interest, and there's still further on down where there's been discussions or highlights of a possible another bond issue to take care of structural issues that we have. How do you sell that to people that are having trouble to pay for the things just to keep a roof over their head now? Can't have a car to drive their kids to school because they're too close to the 2.5.
It's a valid question.
And then when they migrate out and we lose more kids because they migrate out, we're going to could possibly totally collapse or implode. That part's frustrating. And that's what I keep visually seeing and hearing and remembering all the way from the conversations at the beginning of 2018 to what we're sitting here discussing now. And then turn around if something does improve, here comes another $50 million bond because now we need another building. And I don't think those $750,000 to $1.5 million homes that could be or may be built over here in the area around Henry are going to be enough to bring that tax income in.
Sure. It's a valid concern.
Thank you.
Thank you. There is a noted issue here where you right now have all your fifth grade under one roof. So arguably that variability is reduced. One building principal, one instructional model, right? As you split that out, it's kind of that reverse of what we talked about as a pro. Now you increase the potential variability. What I can't tell you is what the instructional model would look like today. What I can tell you is one, it's going to be heavily dependent on staff input. Two, it's likely not going to look like the fourth grade, and it's not going to look like it does today. It's probably going to be somewhere in between. Because a fifth grade intermediate center is different than the traditional fifth grade in their own classroom setup. Again, staff reassignment. I'm going to tell you, though, of all the staffs, and Amy Jo was there, these are the folks that are probably the most on board and otherwise behind this decision should it move forward. And I applaud them for that because that is really tough to be an advocate for when it represents a second order change for you.
Well, I know in one of the meetings that I attended, they were talking about the teachers get to go back to their home schools. So we've already uprooted them once. So this takes them back home to families that they left.
Well, a lot of them turned over just because of our normal turnover. And not David Brewer, but the intermediate school, each pod represents an elementary school this year because of some of the problems that the administration and the teachers got together and said, here's one way to address it that doesn't take money.
Yep. We went to the cohort model, as we're calling it, first year. And then to Mrs. Murphy's point, I think there is a perception of instability that this would breed. Folks will begin to wonder, it was only 6 years ago when you needed this space. Now you're going to bring them back, right? I think there would be a lot of questions.
But I guess maybe the answer to that also is part of leadership is taking the feedback that we're getting. We did that, but that's the biggest thing that comes up to the top. People don't like that. And so maybe we got to go a different way.
Well, the solution that we were trying to create with the intermediate center was not that the elementaries were overcrowded. It was that Warren was overcrowded. And so Warren is not overcrowded, but
Thank you.
And I get that. That's very frustrating. But then I wonder, you got to lift and shift sometimes. If it's not working.
Remind me where the tornado safe room is on the Warren complex. Is that in a new section of the 5th, 6th grade center or the 6th,
it's the gym on the
5th, 6th grade side?
Yeah. The gym is.
Maybe your gym. Your female.
So here's another little angst. One of the reasons of also building that and putting in that tornado safe room was because there was no tornado safe area in that whole area. And that was to protect all the kids. Is that still, should we proceed to go through this? Is this still going to be made accessible so those kids can get into that safe area?
I think we should not only make it accessible to students, but to adjacent community members.
Well, yeah, that would supposed to have been anyway.
Yep.
If there were that kind of an emergency coming through, because the housing that's right through there, which I'm well aware, I live there.
Excuse me, there is a safe room in Warren. You guys put it in the art room.
Oh, the art room. Okay.
There is one on each side. Sorry to interrupt. I just
No,
wanted to
thank you.
clarify.
Yeah, but I just knew there was another space that was added when they built the 5th, 6th grade.
Well, there's the gym, the 5th, 6th grade gym, the locker rooms, but through the bond, you guys built a.
Built the
safe
other
room
one on the other
in
side.
The middle school.
Okay.
Thank you. I wasn't here. No, it's all right.
I completely forgot.
All right, let's talk financial impact. Thank you for the good dialogue so far. So if we only move the 5th grade, there is much less of a savings because you're still running an instructional center. You'll see some FTE reduction. It is when you do both the 5th and the 6th in total, do you really see the proverbial bang for the buck. This one is your second largest savings as of now, at just under $800,000. My opinion is the potential one-time savings, probably the biggest one, is we would immediately say that parking lot expansion is no longer needed. That right there is a projected $500,000 for capital expenses that could then be reallocated for fill in the blank at fill in the blank site. We are recommending, if you do 5th and 6th, that you leave the TAS, 3rd Avenue school programs, in place. That transition has gone well. And I think in the spirit of disrupting the least amount of apple carts we can, we should leave those programs intact.
On the middle school side.
What's that?
On that, they're on the middle school side.
They're on the IC side.
Or they're on the IC.
First floor, when you walk in to the left, I don't know what the official name of that pod is.
That construction was done last summer,
Okay.
and they've got their own entrance.
I was thinking they were over on the middle school side.
No,
Okay.
So then all the kids for 6th, 7th, 8th, and 3rd Avenue will all be in the middle school.
So 3rd Avenue would be in the IC.
Okay.
And then 6, 7, and 8 in the traditional RWMS site. 25 FTE, give or take, and it has.
Have we looked at with our numbers that we're projecting for next year, or how much lower are we still on the amount of students we'll have? next year at Richard Warren
Oh, like what
from
is
what we came from?
if you move the 6th and the 7th up one grade level?
Yeah.
Right.
6th, 7th, and
Amy can get that here for you. in a second. You're perseverating on a thought.
I have a math issue. So keep talking about buildings were K5 before. Dawson is now our K for everything. So we're really looking at 1 through 5. So to me, that still means we have excess capacity in the elementary buildings.
You would.
So is there a possibility we move the 6 to the elementary buildings?
Well, that was my question.
But what does that do for us if we don't?
Yep. So there's a couple things. One is you had more elementaries at the time. 2 is I would not press that upward boundary on that capacity. Because we're still in an issue where autism, we know we need to have a certain footprint for that. Life skills, we want to have a certain footprint for that. And then I'll just say it because I think it bears repeating. There is a level of instability in our student enrollment that we just don't know what's going to happen, right? And so what I don't want to do is leave us enough margin. Does that make sense, Ms. Price? Could you do it? Yes. Could you do it? Yes. Maybe more of a matter of should you do it?
So
Packing them pretty full.
I don't love the idea of not having our special education students in with our non-special education students. I don't know the word. Yeah. But could we take those classes, the life skills classes and the autism class, and provide them with the space that they need at the intermediate center space where Third Avenue is?
So you remove life
alleviate-
skills, you remove David Brewer's autism program.
Mhm.
Right. Again, I think it's an issue of could you versus should you.
Right.
Right.
I mean,
I don't think you should.
So you're gonna have, you would run into, and there's a variety of,
I don't want to alienate the students.
That's law.
your first thing is gonna be, they would be moving from a general ed building to a day school setting, which would require every parent to provide consent, and so many families did not want that. Also, most of our students have a level of coming back in with their gen ed peers that we wouldn't be able to provide at that spot. And then we also have disproportionality that we have to worry about children, that also has financial implications as well.
Good.
I appreciate the question though, because that helps us learn like why should we not do certain things? Because it seems like, hey, this makes sense. Could we? Yes. Should we?
Dr. Adams, the number is 6 and 4, so you can take your 6, 7, and 8, and that would put you at 6 and 4, which is still within the functional capacity.
Thank you. Do you have the history of when, before we moved 6, 7, 8 to 5, 6, 7, 8, what the population was at that time
I can look
that we
at
were
it while
trying to
you're
create the
talking.
solution for? Yeah.
Let's see here.
Yeah, it's also in there, but yes, I will look at that.
Yeah, please.
So when we're talking about redistributing the students back to their home schools, and let's say we go ahead and leave 6th with the 7th, 8th per this option over here, full option over here, should we find that the enrollment have declined and collapsed further, there's still the possibility to turn around and add them back into the home schools. So it would be 1 through 6.
Yeah, to Ms. Price's question.
Yeah, okay. We didn't have, it's not that it has to be done today, but it can be refitted or reformatted. And then maybe where another program might have increased and it might not be optimal, but some of the special educations or whatever might need a bigger room area that we may have at the intermediate where that could be utilized for that.
Yeah, I'll give you this to think about. You don't have to do anything with the 6th graders if you move the 5th graders. You could let them lie at a 6th grade only center. You could wait a year and see how it all unfolds. You could move them immediately. So when I say look at these options separately, I mean that. The caveat is as you continue to run the 6th grade attendance center, you will not realize the full savings. That's the big thing.
650K.
Yep.
Roughly.
Yep.
And we've ran 6 through 8 since my oldest son was in 6th grade. He's 47.
Easy.
Anything else on this one yet? Okay. So again, it goes back to what Mrs. Murphy brought up, and I'm sure several of you have already thought about. But I think you would have a lot of community sensitivity around this because the new car smell is still in that building, and here you are already repurposing it.
I think we're already seeing a whole bunch of community sensitivity right now.
And I appreciate that you put this. Implications for future bond credibility, because it does tarnish that credibility.
There's lots of things that were succeeded with the bond. So,
And then the last one I will say,
Secure building entry for the high school.
I think that there is a need to show that facility is being used as soon as possible. Again, with good measure and good planning, right? So if we said, hey, let's do the 5th grade only, let's take a year to let the 6th grade have their building, I would be okay with that. What I don't want to see is 5th and 6th both exit, and we have no foreseeable plan, and that thing sits empty for 2 or 3 years. I don't think that is what would be best.
What if it sat empty for 1 year while we plan that alternative setting?
well, it wouldn't be
That-
empty because
Well,
Third
it would be
Avenue's
empty
there.
because Third Avenue's there, but I mean, the majority of the building would be vacated. And because I don't know that we could do, it's a lot of changes, and I don't think we're ready to do I love the alternative setting. I think maybe it's necessary, I think it would be helpful, I think it would be a draw for people to stay in the district, come back to the district, but I don't know that we would be ready to have that up and going. You know,
Well, we've talked to moving the district office in there.
And food service for what, 3
And food
people?
service. We could even put some additional special education offices in there from like here. I mean, it would all go. Would any of the technology fit over there?
We have discussed technology. While we're not necessarily opposed to it, the issue there is the infrastructure cost with moving some of that to a more permanent site. It does represent a substantial one-time cost. I think the fiber that is effectively piped in there is an example.
But
the way that
if we
building-
sell the building,
Go ahead.
if you're gonna get rid of this building, those other buildings, wouldn't some of that defer some of that cost?
It can. I want to be upfront. I think that fiber movement would be substantial. Like, I don't think it's a 4 or 5 figure kind of number, if that makes sense. So.
Dr. Adams, may I answer Mrs. Wells'
Sure.
question? The question was, what was the enrollment? 10 years ago, in 15-16, it was 688. That's for grades 6, 7, and 8. The year prior, it was 656. Next year, just for grades 7th and 8th, it will be at 395. If you go again, I'm going to repeat myself, and you do a 6, 7, 8, you put yourself at 604.
So it's still less. Fair, thank you.
Is there a way to look up how much that 5th, 6th grade building cost us as part of that bond issue?
Yeah, you should have had a GMP, a gross maximum price, for each of the sites that you built.
Yeah, I just didn't know if somebody had the figure to give to me right now.
Oh,
Give me a minute.
Thank you.
I do not, Ms. Murphy, sorry.
Thank you.
Back to the IC building. The way that was constructed and what's in there, I don't know if moving offices is the best use of that space. I mean, I guess you could do that, you know, if it were vacated, but I'm just thinking the way that it was built for.
I'm not gonna say it's
For kids.
impossible. Yeah, I really think, especially the folks around this, I really think that if you gave them a space with a internet connection and a desk, they'd make it work. Is it the most conducive to an office space? There's an argument to be made that it's not.
I just think, I mean, going back to some of the community sensitivity and the political implications, I don't know, you build a new center and then we don't put students in there.
But we are still leaving some students in there, and there's still discussion of alternatives. So you do have students, you have Third Avenue,
Right.
there's discussions of alternative, whether it's 20 kids or
But are
150
you saying
kids.
that we would put off the board office over there and
That was the
an
other,
alternative?
that was
or-
the other discussion was to keep the board office in there. You have that huge collaboration space where the portholes are, where we've had a lot of dining events and things could actually be turned into the conference area.
Did we get all the RFIs answered so far?
So,
GMP, got GMP?
well, I have, but I have is was for the entire campus, Warren Educational Campus. So it was the renovation and additions at Warren on the north side and building the intermediate building. So it was a little over 24 million.
24 million, thank you. Over half.
So like scope of work would have been secured entrance at Warren, FEMA shelter at the art classroom. I'm sure we did some.
Getting rid
Collaboration
of those movable walls that they had, because they had the open concept learning.
So just as long as we all agree or understand that the caveat is some of that 24 million was definitely at the RWMS site.
I wish there was a way for us to know the breakdown unless we went to the builders.
I'm sure I have it, I just.
You don't have it right now. That's fine. Thank you.
I have a series of questions for you.
Great.
So, on your slide regarding the cons, you referenced the culture.
This one, maybe? Or I got a couple of cons levels.
The receiving group is the culture. And I just would like you to elaborate on what that is.
Sure. So I want you to think about where you work right now and the office staff and or the team that you have. And think about if I brought in 50% new men and women to that team, would that have an impact on the culture of that team overnight? Right?
As Deming says, culture eats strategy.
Yep.
But we are the same district.
We are.
So the culture, can you elaborate a little bit more specific?
Sure.
Based on what we've heard last week.
Yep.
Thank
I
you.
would argue that culture is how we treat each other as we go about the work. And there is a culture in this office that is different from the culture at Henry and the culture at Brewer, right? And none of them are necessarily better or worse than others, but they are invariably different. And so as I transplant one from one to another, they will invariably be subjected to that new culture.
And in visiting the schools over the last week or so, you do see the culture, and it's very strong here, the Pioneer culture, so I do appreciate that. But there wasn't anything further read into that, just
We recognize it will be one of our biggest, probably our biggest barriers with our adults.
perfect. So having said that, and being the newest person on the board, the one thing I'm not hearing is anything related to academic performance. Is there a reason why?
As far as this exercise is concerned,
Yeah.
I would say
Nothing in the entire, I don't know, since you've been looking at the budget, relates to the academic performance of the schools. Is it, going to help the children to go to David Brewer? Would it help the children to go academically to Anthony or to Henry, whatever the difference is going to be? I don't, or the intermittent center, but I don't know why we haven't heard anything about academic performance.
If I can lean in onto that, and this is something that I've heard within all the schools, if we can get some of the behavioral issues under control, then the academics could very well improve, because you're not going to have the one that's causing a bit of chaos for the other 18 because now you've moved some of that to where they're grouped in closer to their age groups. The 5th grade's now back in with their homes, their homeschool, original homeschools would be. There's less of putting them in with someone near older, and you take care of that behavioral. That way, the academics should improve. That would basically be the hope.
And that's why Dr. Adams is so interested in an alternative school for that 2, 3, name your percentage, single digit that causes 80% of the teachers' problems.
And this is my opinion, but we're not teaching behaviors. I know teachers do that just, from kindergarten on, sit with your hands on your lap, don't touch anyone, hands to yourself, things like that. But I would like to hear more academically how a student leaving Anthony going to Henry would benefit. How a student leaving David Brewer, if they went to Henry, would benefit. I think that's very important.
Okay. I will tell you, we do not have that tonight. What we were asked, we do have your CAP data, which we'll get to in a little bit. But Judy's research question was effectively, what did CAP data look like before we broke apart? And then have we improved or not improved since we put those kids at one site?
So it does seem like it's a very strong focus on culture and finances, but nothing academic for me.
I would agree. I after solving the math problem in front of us and addressing or minimizing the impact of staff, those are the top 2 priorities.
For sure. I appreciate that. Thank you.
Yep. Any others? Okay, we do have some source documents I wanted to go over. I think I was at the end. But before we go there, I want to say that each option, in my opinion, should be evaluated in isolation. But back to some of the conversation we've had tonight, I do think they can and they will likely need to be combined. If and when we decide it is not palatable for the elementary closure, that option is off the table, we still have the large gap to close. So it may be a conversation where other options have to rise and elevate to the top in order to address that math problem. I also want to recognize, and some of the staff are behind me, there's been a lot of great ideas on the surface, and I applaud the folks that have engaged and leaned in. I am not trying to dismiss those ideas right now. A lot of them are predicated on we need available real estate and or staffing or otherwise. And it's my hope we can get into some of those more strategic kind of conversations. But unfortunately, we have not been able to get there yet. And I want to acknowledge the people that have done that and in my opinion, the great level of thought that's been put into those. And then finally, I want to say this again. These assume that the buildings would still be kept. The only buildings that I would contend make sense to sell are places that are central services, i.e. this office, i.e. food service, etc. All right, let's actually prepare to populate these if you don't mind. So you saw the enrollment report. Next, I want to take you to the building map file. This has been asked, I would say, extensively. So first up is look at, and these were done in coordination with the building principal and Mrs. Sloan. So your functional capacity, can you, I want to see those numbers in the top right. Sorry, okay. So you have at Anthony essentially a 3-section school with the exception of third grade. What you will see here is the black font is the current enrollment. The red font is next year's enrollment. The stars represent any classroom that is not currently utilized as a full-time classroom today. What was our count here? Sorry.
Okay, 10. Sorry?
What was our count here?
Empty rooms, I'm sorry, it was, I believe it was 11, I didn't total, I'm sorry.
It's all right.
I thought Anthony was 10.
10, sorry, it's 10, sorry.
10 classrooms. Now, if you were to walk in that building tomorrow, you may see, hey, there is somebody in there. They're using that space. I want to make it clear. We use our space, right? But for intensive purposes of several of these, they are not used as a full-time classroom from 8 to 3. Where would first grade land? Where would second grade land? I cannot tell you that tonight. My purpose here is illustrative to show you the number of classrooms that are available. All right, if we can go to David Brewer, same conversation. David Brewer, if I'm not mistaken, has the least amount, and this represents a net total of 7. Same idea. Black font face is current enrollment, red font face is next year's enrollment. Section counts at Brewer are higher across the board, so that is a 4 sections. And let's go ahead with Henry.
Henry's 11. I think 11.
Henry, I believe, is, 3 sections across the board. Same concept. These are a little more concentrated in 2 areas, I would argue. And I can't tell you where specific classrooms would land. As you can see here, 11 total classrooms. And finally, let's hit the IC, please. Or sorry, this is Warren. My apologies.
10.
Help me out. This is a colored pod. I just can't remember the color, but nonetheless, it is a pod. And so it is all concentrated, so to speak, with the exception of 230 and 187.
That's red pod.
Thank you. Red pod. All right. Questions about the classroom layouts? That was one of the RFIs we received earlier in the week. All right, back to that slide, please. All right, what was next? Staff meeting presentation. I probably won't cover here tonight, but just know that that is there. That was again offered at each of the affected buildings, wrapped up today at Henry. We are more than willing to offer extended conversations with the high school, middle school, and Lawson, but for what it's worth, we hit those buildings by design because they were arguably more impactful. All right, we were asked for building expenses on the capital side. This is fiscal year to date, so July 1 through, I guess, what?
I think the last one was 1/21 of this year.
Very good. Let's just go to the bottom and see those site totals, please. So site totals, and more specifically district total. So you have spent just under $500,000 this fiscal year. These, I would argue, are not projects. So these are things that break down, i.e. repairs, what I sometimes call Band-Aids and bubble gum.
Just a specific review of all of our purchase orders, and I went through, and even if they were like combined, like roof repair invoices, and broke it out by building. So, and I did include the BOE just because I felt like there was some significant expenses this year that might help.
That doesn't count the roof repairs we authorized back in
No, not yet.
earlier this month.
Right.
And your average roofs per year is what? 750,000?
Yeah, pretty close to that. What I've been spending lately.
We will wrap up this RFI with the capital outlay related questions, but this is the one we were able to get to sooner. So thank you. All right, Ryan, let's move on, please. All right, this was our CAP data comparison. And the question was, the research question was essentially what was performance like in our current 5th grade model compared to when they were previously in elementary schools. So there are some caveats that I think are important here. First of which is your assessment model has changed. Second of which is obviously we've got a pre-pandemic type of phenomenon going on here, right? And then of course we move students arguably over 1 year, but there may have been some of those transitional effects that occurred over several years. So first up is the math aggregate. The latest year is to the left on the x-axis, starting with 2016, it looks like. On the right side. Like I said, 2015. Level 1, which is the lowest academic rating, orange, 2 then in yellow, green, and then finally blue.
And what was the first year that the IC was used in its capacity?
So the cut is between 19 and 21 years. So spring, just coincidentally, COVID, we didn't take state assessments in spring of 20. So it actually creates a pretty even cut for you. So spring of 19 was the last year they were in elementary settings, and when we had 4, and then spring of 21 would be the first year back from state testing after the COVID.
All right, that one's math. Next up, science.
And 5th grade is the only grade that takes this in the elementary setting, just for some knowledge there.
And finally, English language arts. Thank you to the Learning Services team for generating that today. All right, Ryan, what's next? All right, the next RFI we received was for free and reduced data. Ryan, you pulled this one, or your team did. Poll date was today. Okay, so poll date was effective date of today. Brewers, 78%, let's call it. 73 at Anthony, and 56 at Henry. Okay, next one. All right, this is where I expected more robust conversation. So we have been working with Easton to determine what this would look like as far as the aid to transportation from not only the revenue perspective, but more importantly, who would begin to qualify. So in the case of if all Anthony students were transported to Henry, you would see approximately 2/3 that would now be over the 2.5 mile radius. So 2 and 3 students by current policy would qualify.
So say that one more time. The whole.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep. So this is the first scenario. This is that 1A, all of Anthony and Henry, right? What I don't have for you right now, did he finish this? Is that current tab done? These were coming in all throughout the day. So
I mean, that was based on the data that we pulled from Power School.
pull up the current. Let's see if it's there. I am so thankful for a very talented team. Here we go. All right. What you're going to see here is a drastic increase. So as those students move farther from their front porch to the flagpole, more of them will qualify. Now, we'll clearly have an issue on the walking, right? But for what it is worth, your current policy would qualify more of them for transportation. Look at current busing to Anthony. Only 7% of those students right now qualify for transportation. That to me is a marked difference.
And how many buses do we already do from that area to?
If they have a count.
Two. Two buses.
Yep.
And we still have a waiting list for a third?
I think so.
So let's toggle back and forth between tab 1 and tab 2. This will be an exercise in your dexterity. Good. Okay, so scenario 2 is half of Anthony to Henry and half to Brewer. It drops, as you can see, but it's still markedly better. So those again are the two Anthony scenarios. Now let's shift to 1B. This is half of Brewer. Scroll down for us a little bit. All right, half of Brewer. And that one is over at 60%. Let's go to the current now. So essentially, most students under the current model do not qualify for transportation. So while the beauty is that flagpole to front porch is less, it also means that until we change our policy, the majority of students would not qualify.
Dr. Adams, if Ryan scrolls over, is it great?
Charts the visuals.
That'd be helpful.
I think I've said this before, Warren typically trends better. And the reason is Warren is in a centralized location in town. The other one that trends pretty high is Lawson, because it's at the northmost boundary. And so arguably students in the southern part would likely qualify. But if you're in a neighborhood elementary setup, then it is plausible and possible the majority of kids would not qualify. All right, let's look at some costs. That one has a big implication. We recognize that. That should be the last source document. All right, this one came in today. So I'm going to run through these kind of quickly, and then we'll get to the brass tacks of the numbers. Mrs. Wilson, to your question. Currently 2 buses at Anthony. This would bring our total of 6, so a net out of 4. If you close Brewer, you're adding 3 more to Anthony and 3 more to Henry. So a net out of 6. And I'm just hitting the high points here.
Do you think that could potentially be a positive for some families? Because the situation we're in where almost no one qualifies, but we're right there and not good walking routes and everything. Even if you were going further, I wonder if it would be a net positive or potentially.
2 things for your consideration. And again, this gets into the how do we shift from the current problem to more strategic conversations. But one is, as you start running more buses, you will start putting buses closer to more front doors and or more stops. It is absolutely legal to pick up kids inside of the 2.5-mile bubble as you work your way back. So you've already added the expense to go here. As you're working your way back, would it be to your benefit and certainly the kids' benefit to pick them up along the way?
Now, is that a free pickup?
Yeah, the seats. What?
Is that a free pickup, or is that where they charge you the $365 a year?
I do not have that answer tonight, but you would have both options available. My point is, you've already created the expense. Why not maximize the ridership on those buses?
Which Lansing has been doing for years.
Option 2, and I'm going to prepare you, is arguably one that people may not be ready for. If you're willing to shift the school start times, you can start transporting everybody. Again, I recognize we're already dealing with a number of changes, and I just brought up another big one.
I would agree to moving high school back based upon.
Someone has to go earlier, someone has to go later. Who those someones are, I don't know.
A lot of psychological studies saying starting high school kids that early is not best for them.
No, it's not. They
But
should
again,
be starting at 9 o'clock.
if we look at what are we not doing right now that we could start doing that would impact the lives of students in a better way, this is one of those, in my opinion, that you should look at. All right, Ryan, if you would, please. So regardless of if you add anything, and I'm sorry, just real fast, we are recognizing that options 2A and 2B do not have an impact necessarily. The impact of 2A is depending on what you do as far as the number of closures. But the idea was those 4th graders are already there. They would stay there for another year. The idea at Warren, if those kids just enter on the new Lawrence side here, or if they enter at this door over here, that would have no impact of transportation, right? Okay. So let's go to the costs now. So regardless, FYI, where those lines are drawn, I want to emphasize they're in no way, shape, or form final. Those lines represent nothing more than our transportation folks attempting to split kids evenly, okay? You clear, these lines are no way an indication of a final decision or otherwise, okay? All right, Ryan, let's go to the costs. So regardless of if you make any of these changes or not, keep going. You are looking at a $210,000 increase for transportation next year. That is solely for the inflationary associated costs. I want to be clear in Easton's defense, this money is not going to their bottom line. It is going to increase driver wages and monitor wages. Okay? They have proposed the following table that you can see there that kind of front loads the increase. So 9% in the first year, as you'll see, and then 4% on a 5-year. Again, this right here is if you don't do anything. So this one, I would argue, is one of those known costs in that $2 million number. Let's go to the next page. It's likely the question you've been asking. Okay, if we add all that transportation, what will it do? The net add of those new runs, Ryan, keep going, is $369,000.
Easton telling us that they're able to come up with the buses and the drivers to make this shift happen.
The physical capital is not as much of a concern as the human capital.
Right. Mm-hmm.
They believe that they, with enough lead time, can get the buses. It is a matter of whether or not they can get the men and women to drive those. What I don't have for you today is the revenue associated with the increased state aid. But I want to make it clear, you would have increased revenue because more kids would qualify. And Beth and I would need to have a conversation with school finance at KSDE to confirm that number. We have not yet gotten it because we just got these numbers today. Okay, I think that wraps up the source documents. The one that's not linked there yet is what we're intending to make the public-facing FAQ document. So available for anyone with an internet connection. Kathy, are you still the author? What we want to know with our time left is what additional questions are still hanging out there. She's been capturing the ones you've already obviously cast so far. But what else can we do as we enter the next 2 weeks leading up to the 9th? Mrs. Brown.
Just the two things you mentioned back with the staff medical expenses. Is there a way to get an estimate? That's my question. And what is the timeline for that whenever they would present those numbers? That's the question.
Okay.
And what would be the timeline for you to have to notify the state about the busing? The question. Those three.
Okay.
Thank you.
So major medical or healthcare timeline, projected costs from the carrier, and they're going to cap the prior year expenditures at 110%. We should be able to turn it in up to August. Thank you.
Thank you.
I have just so like Alicia Murphy was saying earlier about like being more for the kids. So if we were to move 5th and 6th grade, it would have less of an impact on our students, right? Because 5th grade would go up, like 4th grade would be going to 5th grade, so they've not yet moved their building. So 5th grade would stay where they're at, and 6th grade's already going up to Richard Warren. So that would be the one that would impact our students the less, right?
One could make that argument, yes.
Okay.
But financially, it doesn't get you where you need to be, or we need to.
It doesn't.
Financially, it does not have as big a bang for the buck. Yes. Yep. Did I answer that question?
Yes.
Okay.
That answers the
I'm just
question.
trying to think of how we phrase it for the FAQ, right? But from that total impact, right? One could definitely make the argument 4th graders simply staying at their building for another year has much less of an impact than going to a brand new building, right? Mr. Darling?
I think I gave you mine already.
Thank you for sending this.
And I just realized, as we all do up here, that regardless of what we do in the numbers, we got to do something. Somewhere between 30 and 40% of Leavenworth will hate us. 40% won't care. And that leaves about 20-some% to be happy with.
Is there a question in there?
No.
Okay. All right, very good. All right, thank you. Ms. Price?
I would just kind of echo what Mr. Darling was saying, that we don't want to be in this position, but the position that we're in is not sustainable. We have underutilized space. We don't have the tax base to keep coming back to maintain what we have. So I guess what I'm saying is I am in agreement that we gotta do something. And it's not,
And bad news doesn't get better by delaying the decision.
and what I would, and I'll just say this too, what I wouldn't want, and having gone to these staff meetings now and everything, I think it would be a terrible thing to do to not make a decision on the 9th of February. Because people need to digest and get ready, and if big changes are gonna happen, it would be a terrible thing to have this problem hanging over our heads for a whole nother year. Because we'll be right back where we are this time next year. So, only worse off, because we'd have an even bigger, a bigger problem. So, I guess I just would like to encourage my colleagues here on the board. I mean, I know this is stuff that I wake up in the middle of the night thinking about, and it weighs heavy on you, but I think decisions have to be made, and that's part of leadership.
Ms. Walls?
I definitely think that regardless of what decision we make, financially, we need to be looking at the student impact. I know we've talked a lot about our staff, which our staff is extremely important, but we need to look at what it's going to affect educationally for our students, classroom sizes, and the models that we present to them, I think, are important. We keep changing, and our numbers are not getting better. Doing this, I think we all know that we're not doing this to get better educational numbers. Our test scores are not probably going to go up by increasing potentially class size, but we're not always saying that this is going to increase class sizes by shifting the elementaries, that we're just moving the elementaries to different places. But we still really need to be mindful of the experiences that our students are having in the classrooms every day.
There's two things I'd like to reiterate before I go to you, Ms. Murphy. One, all of our models are predicated on we are not looking to increase class sizes. So I just wanted to dispel that myth right now. You still have the ability to authorize that. I think that's typically an April decision. Maybe we move that up this year. But to just clear the air, we are not looking at class sizes of 30 plus.
We're not looking at class sizes going up, but just throwing more kids into elementary schools. Like, I know I've worked in several of our district building schools, and there's behaviors in the buildings we currently have now that we still haven't gotten managed. So pitting those more combined and compact together is not going to help the students, the staff, or anybody else. Just my personal, not a question or answer, but my personal opinion. It's not going to help. We're seeing that we're not getting what we need now with our buildings as far as behavior-wise to get our staff supported in their classroom with their student numbers now. Just for the school that my kids attend, I know the 4th grade has continued to grow just within a couple weeks as we're getting ready for Valentine's Day. The numbers are going up and up and up. So, yeah, we have a cap for our numbers, but we still are accepting kids. So, like, for me, I just think, like, behaviors, like Miss Wells was saying, it's not going to help at all. And that's just my personal opinion.
Thank
I've worked in a few buildings. I have a lot of kids.
The second thing to connect to your comments is we're also not entertaining, and nor do I expect to entertain, any type of reduction in force. So I just wanted to offer that. We are not entertaining any type of reduction in force. Ms. Murphy, close us out.
Okay, so when we're looking at these school buildings and possibly incorporating Fifth into all the little homeschools, let's just do based on the model that we kept all three. We still have leftover classrooms. If the numbers go up, we can increase a class for each grade almost with a teacher, which would increase force, but can keep the classrooms still small, so they're not overcrowded. So I do see that potential there, which may help with some of the management inside the classrooms. 6th grade, it might become a little sticky wicket if we had to do that in a year or two. In looking at that, if we even had to do that, that still could be, if we grew, we could still pivot again a couple of years later and slide the 6th grade back if it had to be. We could do these, like you say, in increments.
Mm-hmm.
It's not optimal to me. I mean, you know, it wouldn't be the perfect scenario because I know people wouldn't like every couple of years you shut these big shifts. But the class, I can see where the classroom sizes, if they keep increasing, like you say, they have over in your home building, they can add a teacher. They have space to add a teacher to minimize some of that. I think too, what we need to be aware of, part of that with increasing the sizes, because one of the biggest complaints I've had is that teachers are being asked to do more and more. Some of them even making comments that they're being asked to do things they're not even licensed to do in the classroom. I'm not exactly sure what that means, but there's a sense of burnout and frustration with that. So that's part of the culture we need to worry about, because if the teachers aren't happy and they're standing in front of the students in the classroom, I don't care how great a human being you can be, those frustrations go out onto those kids too. And we do have high sensory students that can feel other people's feelings, to where if they feel and sense that frustration, they can enact on that frustration. So I just know we need to be very careful and mindful of that too, because we can't afford to lose our good teachers, but we also don't need to increase the dynamics in the classroom that could escalate other behaviors. Other than that, there's just a lot of thinking to do.
There is. Any questions?
No.
Okay.
I do have one alibi. So the alternative school, what's the trigger for that to make the decision in February? What's the trigger to start staffing or allocating
Sure.
alternative school?
So let's just say you made a decision in February, and that decision was to effectively move 5th grade and 6th grade. So now the real estate is available. I would ask for 1 full year of planning, so that our departments and otherwise can do this and do it right. My concern is implementation burnout.
No, I understand. I'm just trying to figure out what the trigger for the decision would be for the alternative.
But if you give us that green light in February, I'm saying the planning starts almost immediately.
And with the alternative school, what grades are you talking about?
That's probably something we can still wrestle with, right? We've got a Swiss program, a school within a school program in Anthony right now. We've also got, I would argue, concerns about our virtual program that have surfaced that I want to acknowledge. But in an ideal world, you would find a way to service K through 12. In an ideal world. So no matter what the age of the student, there's an alternative setting. What I can't promise you here tonight is whether or not we would be ready for that right away.
Okay, back on an alibi for that. When we say alternative K through 12, are we talking a one-room schoolhouse, basically, or are we going to have, there's going to be a room where there might be 2 kindergarten and a room with 3 first grade? Split like that, or?
I would not recommend the one-room schoolhouse.
Okay, well, I wouldn't either, but you know, unless you've got one of those schoolmasters, and that's a whole nother animal.
I hate to go into too many details, but suffice it to say there's going to be an elementary type of delivery model. a middle school type of delivery model, and likely a high school delivery model. Does that make sense?
Thank you.
Anything else? We are just a little bit over time. All right, so we'll go ahead and adjourn this work session. Thank you.
Dr. Adams, I want to thank you, the staff, and everybody here for their interest